Hello and welcome to another review of A Brothers Grimm tale. Today we will be discussing the tale of The Crows by the Brothers Grimm. Now this is not to be confused with their other fairy tales which feature 7 ravens or other 3 ravens, or they've got 10 different tales that incorporate crows in them or in the title. Now, there's no history for this one of when this one was written down or where they sourced this one from. But as with most of the Grimm fairy tales, their source is usually German mythology or German folk tales or German fairy tales, which is what they are. Now, crows are usually used as a symbol or a metaphor in many different traditions, many different mythologies. They pop up all over the place as portents or harbingers of doom or death, usually because of their dark plumage or their very haunting cries or the fact that they like to eat carrion. And in this fairy tale, I want to say that there are a few trigger warnings for this. Although it is a fairy tale and you would think it's for children, keep in mind that the very first version of the Children's and Household Tales by the Brothers Grimm was not for children. It was written for adults and therefore had more adult descriptions and themes. This one in particular has the graphic descriptions of gore. So if you don't like gore in any of your fairy tales, if you would rather the princess and, I would say Sleeping Beauty, but I've been doing a dive into that and oh my god. But if a cutesy princess is more your type, then this probably is not going to be the fairy tale for you. So, with that out of the way, let's get into it. Now, it happened one day that a band of soldiers were on their way home because the army had been disbanded, the king no longer needed their services, and they were on their way home. Now, one of the soldiers of the 3 was quite honest and diligent, and he had saved most of the money from his pay because he had not squandered his earnings, as had most of the soldiers in the army, in taverns and on wenches and on drink and on the pleasures of life, shall we say. And it just so happened that the other 2 of his comrades, because they were travelling as a trio, so you've got the honest and diligent money-saving guy, and of course his 2 other comrades were devious rogues and wanted the soldier with the money. They wanted his money for themselves because they had been part of the ones that had squandered their money on tavern, drinking and wenches. To this end, they pretended to be his friend. And it came that they said to their hard-working, money-saving friend, they said, "Comrade, why should we stay here shut up in this town like prisoners, when you, at any rate, have saved enough to live upon in the rest of your life in peace and plenty, at home by your own fireside, and we could come with you?" Freeloading fuckers. And they kept badgering him and talking to him in this manner until he agreed to leave the city with them. Can anybody else spot a red flag? Because this, red flag. If your friends only want you for your money, they're not your friends. Now, after they had walked away from the city for quite a bit of time, the 2 rogues said that they must turn right at this crossroads that was coming up if they wanted to get to the border. And they said it even though they knew that it was untrue. But as soon as the soldier contradicted them and said, "No, that road goes back to the city we've just left, we've got to take the left road," they picked a quarrel with him and said, "Why do you give yourself airs? Why do you always think that you're better than us? You know nothing about anything. How dare you think that you're above us?" And then they rushed at him, 2 on 1, hitting him until he fell down and continuing to beat, punch and kick him while he was on the ground until he was unconscious. And once he was unconscious, they took everything of value from his body. They took all of his money, they took his good clothes. He was left with nothing in the dirt. But leaving him unconscious in the dirt, having beaten and robbed him, wasn't enough for them, because they feared repercussions from doing this heinous act, because they were a soldier and people don't take well to soldiers being beaten up by other soldiers and left for dead. So they hacked both of his eyes out, took the eyeballs straight from his head, dragged him to a gallows tree which was nearby, strung him up tightly on this gallows tree, and left him to die. They knew he wasn't dead, but they left him there to die from either overexposure, starvation, or he was going to be eaten alive by whatever lived in the forest. And they went back to the city to spend the soldiers' money that they'd just robbed in taverns on drink and on wenches. Leaving the soldier hanging from the gallows tree with no money, hardly any clothes, no eyes, and beaten to a bloody pulp. Now, hours passed because the guy was unconscious. But when he did finally come back into his senses, the poor, now blind and beaten soldier, of course, didn't know where he was, and he groped about to feel something, and he felt the wood of the tree. And he believed it was a cross. There's going to be religious connotations to this fairy tale in particular, as it bled into some of the fairy tales of the time. But we're going to go with it. I'm not going to change it for this one. And the soldier said, well, at least they had the decency to string me up on a cross, and that God would be with him. And he prayed to find a way out of his predicament, which didn't particularly go well for the last guy that was strung up on a cross. So I wouldn't really want to draw that parallel. Son of God, my arse. Now, when it became dark, he heard the fluttering of wings, and 3 crows had flown down and alighted on this gallows tree branch. Now, incidentally, crows are not really associated with God the Cross in the Bible. They're more associated with Odin and Norse mythology. Now, the 3 crows landed on this tree branch, and the poor soldier heard them talking to each other, because why not? And he heard one of the crows say to the others this: "Oh, if only the people knew what we know. The king's daughter is sick, and the old king has promised to give her to anyone who can cure her." What is it with kings just giving daughters to random people that can cure them? But no one can do it, for she'll only get well again if the toad in the pond over there is burned to ashes alive, and she drinks those ashes with some water. Well, how appetizing. And then the second crow chimed in and said, "Only if the people knew what we know. A dew will fall from heaven tonight, and it will have such miraculous healing powers that the blind will be able to regain their sight if they rub their eyes with it." Convenient. And finally, the third crow said to them, "Oh, if only the people knew what we know. The toad can only help one person, and the dew can only help a few. Meanwhile, there's a great emergency in the city over yonder. All the wells are dried out, and nobody knows that if the people removed the square stone in the marketplace and dug beneath that particular spot, the most beautiful water would just gush forth." I smell a side quest. Now, after the 3 crows had finished talking to each other, the blind man heard the flutter of wings again as the crows flew away. And slowly, agonizingly slowly, he was finally able to untie himself and dropped from the gallows branch to the dewy grass below. And he pulled out a few blades of this grass that is covered in dew, and he rubbed his eyes with them. And miraculously, his eyes grew back, and he regained his sight. And he looked around him, and he found where he was. He was at the base of a gallows tree, having just escaped from being strung up and left for dead. And he looked around for some earthenware or makeshift cups, which are just scattered around this gallows tree for, I don't know, some reason people wanted to watch them swing, God knows. But he gathered up as much dew as he could in these earthenware cups, put them in his bag. Doesn't say that they had lids on or anything, but put them in his bag to use for later. Now next he went and journeyed to this pond that wasn't very far away, he could see it from the tree, and he grabbed hold of this toad. I mean, who's to say that it wasn't like a prince in you never know with these stories, just grabbing hold of an animal. And he burned it alive, scooped up its ashes in another cup, and put that in his backpack, rucksack, something. When daylight came, he travelled to the king's court where the princess was sick, and had the princess drink this toad ash water mixture. And when she was instantly restored to full health, he demanded that he have her for his wife just as the king had promised. Now the king, upon seeing him, didn't exactly take a liking to him, because he was dressed so poorly, and he said that anyone who wanted to marry his daughter not only had to cure her, which, he'd already done, but also had to figure out a way of providing water for the whole city, as all the wells had dried up. And with this quest, because the best people in the land had been trying to find water, he hoped to be rid of this, guy. I mean, let's just take a snapshot. This random guy rocks up at your court. He's looked like he's had 7 shades of shit knocked out of him. His eyes are all red and swollen because they've grown back overnight. And he rocks up and he wants your daughter to drink this ashy water concoction, which she does. Great parenting there. And then she instantly gets better, and you just promised your only daughter an heir to this random stranger. No wonder he didn't like him. But the soldier, knowing what he knew from overhearing the crows talk, went straight into the city and ordered that people gather in the marketplace to remove this square stone from the centre and to dig underneath it for water. Now no sooner had the first shovel broke ground under this square stone than water shot up like a fountain and filled the square. And now the king could no longer stall the soldier, because after all, the king had promised, and royalty isn't supposed to go back on its promises, especially in fairy tales, good God. And he agreed that the princess would marry him, and marry together they did, and they ended up living quite happily together. But I'm not done. Because there happened to come a day when the soldier, now turned prince and heir to the kingdom, was wandering about in his fields outside the city. Just randomly wandering about. And he happened to come across his 2 former comrades, who had beaten him, blinded him, robbed him, strung him up, and left him for dead. Now they didn't recognise him, but he knew who they were instantly. Now I know what you're thinking. You're thinking revenge. And as much as I wanted, it doesn't go there. Now he went over and introduced himself to him. Because why would you? But they instantly fell on his feet and wanted his mercy, because he was dressed richly, he was now prince of the city, married to the princess, in line to inherit the kingdom. Wow, what an outcome. Now as the soldier ultimately had a kind heart, he took pity on them, brought them with him back to the palace, gave them food and drink and clothes, and told them the story of what had happened to him when they had left. Now, when the 2 rogues heard this tale of how their former comrade had gone from being strung up blind to a prince, to married to a princess, inheriting a kingdom, they were eager to spend a night underneath the gallows tree themselves and hear what the crows had to say and what they could use to their advantage. So that's right where they went. As soon as the meal was finished, they went to the gallows tree, just skedaddled off. Now, they went and sat under the gallows tree, and soon enough they heard the fluttering of wings as the 3 crows came down. Now, they were very angry. The crows were very, very angry. And one of them said to the others, "Listen, somebody must have overheard us, because the king's daughter's now healthy, the toad is gone from the pond, a blind man regained his sight, and they've dug a fresh well in the city. This won't stand. Let's look for the eavesdropper and punish him." Now when they swooped down from the branch of the gallows tree, they didn't find just one eavesdropper, they found 2. They found the two former soldiers, and before the men could even attempt to defend themselves, the crows sat on their heads, entangled their claws in their hair, entangled their talons in their hair, and pecked out their eyes. And then they kept hacking at their faces with their beaks until both men were dead, and they left them underneath the gallows tree with no face. Or just, ragged bands of skin, just blood and bleh. Now, after a few days had passed and the soldiers had not returned to our original soldier, he wondered where they were. I mean, why would you? Was there any mention of them coming back to him? Our soldier wondered what had happened to them, and he set out for the gallows tree himself to find out what had happened to them. Now, he came to the gallows tree and found nothing, except underneath the gallows tree was nothing but bones, which had been picked clean. And he buried these bones underneath the gallows tree and went home to rule his kingdom. Which is a bit of an abrupt ending, but there's a lot of eye gouging in this. So let me know your thoughts on this Brothers Grimm tale down below, and don't forget to like and subscribe, and as always, keep reading.
The moonlight's soft embrace, dark star sips with calm and grace. Wine flows like whispers, secrets told, in the night where dreams unfold. Lonely shadows dance with glee, eyes of amber, soul set free. Finds they weave a tale so grand, woven by a whispering hand. Sip the wine, embrace the night, dark stars journey shining bright. Through the trials, through the pain, love and light shall still